Mr. Speaker, we have one of the most serious assaults on religious liberty in American history. The President's rule, finalized last Friday in its unchanged form, as we just heard, violates the individual rights to religious freedom that every American shares. The Bill of Rights doesn't pertain to organizations. It wasn't written for groups. It was written for individuals. Every individual having the right to exercise their religious belief. The President's rule not only restricts individuals, it restricts everything except the actual what exists within the walls of a church building. Mr. Speaker, that's not what the First Amendment's about. My parents, like many immigrants to this country, fled countries where those beliefs weren't held. My parents came from communist countries where we don't find it far-fetched to believe that they would imprison, they would punish individuals for their religious belief. But let's look at what the President's Affordable Care Act has turned into. Mr. Speaker, we knew America knew when that bill was passed, because the previous Speaker of the House said, we just have to wait to pass it, we'll find out what's in it. Mr. Speaker, we're finding out what's in it, and America doesn't like it. Because what's in it is the ability, under the current rule, to restrict individual religious freedom. And if you choose to exercise your religious freedom, you are punished by the government with a fine. And it's not just a few dollars. It's $2,000 per employee. If an employer has deeply held religious beliefs, deeply held, it's not up to the President or the Secretary of Health or anyone in the federal bureaucracy or government to decide if those are appropriate religious beliefs. And yet that's exactly what this rule does. It says if you don't share their religious beliefs or their beliefs in certain types of health care, you're going to pay a fine to the government. Well, that sounds a lot like governments where immigrants have fled from to this country to share in the individual religious belief. Let's go down the list of what this final rule impairs. It violates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, passed in this Congress 2 decades ago. It obviously violates the First Amendment free exercise clause because it does place a substantial burden on individuals who choose to exercise religious belief. That's all they're doing. We have made it an effective crime to hold a certain religious belief that this administration disagrees with. That's not America. That describes a whole lot of other countries in the world, but it doesn't describe America. It violates the First Amendment free exercise rights because it intentionally discriminates against religious beliefs. It imposes requirements on some religions, not on others. It picks winners and losers. It's exactly what the First Amendment was meant not to do. And Mr. Speaker, it's not going to be adequate if we just extend it to religious organizations, because I remind you, the First Amendment is not about groups or buildings or churches or any institutions. It's about the ability of every American to not violate their conscience. And if their conscience says it would be wrong for me to provide insurance to an employee that would provide something that my religious beliefs disagrees with, who are we as the government to step in and say, you have to violate your religious beliefs, and if you don't, you pay a fine to the government? That's not the America we believe in. It never has been. Hopefully, it never will be. We know that the President's final rule, because we just heard it. And Mr. Speaker, you know, some people listening to us, they'll say, oh, that's not true, that's not true. Go Google the final rule. Compare it to the rule last summer. The final rule, issued hours after the President claimed a compromise, and compare it with the interim rule issued last summer. Not a comma is different. Not a comma was changed. The smoke and mirrors was, don't listen to what I say, don't watch my hands as I do this magic. Go and read the final rule. There was not a single change. There was an accounting gimmick. Americans understand accounting gimmicks. That's why we're in the fiscal mess we're in, because Washington likes them. This time the accounting gimmicks attempts to override Americans' religious conscience. And you can't do that. Americans understand there's no such thing as free anything. Somebody pays for it. And if the government is going to mandate that an employer provide insurance that includes provisions that conflict with their conscience beliefs, this is an accounting gimmick to say that somebody else has to pay for the rest of that insurance policy that you provided. Every American knows that's not true. We know specifically for larger institutions that self-insure, they are the insurer. There is no other insurance company. Large bodies, and if they happen to be religious, self-insure, you will now force them to violate their conscience or pay a $2,000 person fine. I want to thank the representative from Colorado for bringing this point up tonight, reminding the American public to pay attention to the debate. Go look at that final rule and understand we are in the same situation where we were last week with a violation of religious liberty that we should never tolerate. And I thank you for yielding me the time.